Thank you for watching my video on a quick summary of World War I. This video will serve as a quick introduction to the war, as well as to answer why it was fought and who fought in it. I hope it is helpful in getting an understanding of this vast topic. While there had been extensive buildup of hostilities between European powers for decades leading up to the war, the official start to the First World War was when Serbian nationalist Gavrilo Princip shot then heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. The assassination triggered a powder keg that had been waiting to explode. A combination of a series of previous alliances, promises of protections of neutrality, nationalism, cultural differences, and existing rivalries formed the two sides known as the Triple Entente, consisting of Great Britain, France, and Russia, and the Central Powers, consisting of Germany, Austro-Hungary, Italy, and the Ottoman Empire. Italy would switch sides to the Triple Entente in 1915. Europe quickly descended into chaos following the Duke's assassination. 1.2 million casualties would be incurred on the Western Front in the months of late July to mid-September in 1914 alone. It was the beginning of 4 long years of death, despair, and destruction. The world would never be the same. Through their vast colonial empires, European involvement meant involvement of faraway colonies in Africa, Asia, South, Central, and North America. Truly every inhabited continent contributed one fashion or another, whether through committing troops to combat or sending supplies. By war's end, roughly 70 million soldiers would be mobilized overall. Colonial troops could come from every corner of the world, from Senegal to Australia. While some colonial forces primarily fought in their home countries, others traveled to faraway lands to fight for their distant rulers. Can you imagine being an Indian or Senegalese soldier fighting for your colonial masters in faraway France? Initially having adopted a largely isolationist policy, the United States would not join the conflict until 3 years into the war in 1917, primarily due to the sinking of the Lusitania and the Zimmermann telegram. Approximately 2 million Americans served overseas, and approximately 1.4 million of those saw combat. What is often disregarded is the contribution the Black Americans made to the war effort. Over 370,000 African Americans served, with roughly 200,000 deploying to Europe. They were often denied combat roles and served in support functions. Units like the Harlem Hellfighters fought and served with distinction and valor, only under the French flag and not their native one. Another often unaddressed contributor to the war effort was the role women played. With the mass casualties, disease, and general dangerous nature of a war zone, nurses played an invaluable role in tending to the many wounded combat men. 21,480 women served as nurses during the war for the United States, and approximately 150,000 for Britain, and 90,000 more for Germany. Who knows how many more women served given the many nations that participated in the war. With able-bodied men largely being utilized in military roles, women also took on the role of factory workers to produce the millions of artillery shells, bullets, clothing items, and an infinite number of other items that contributed to the war effort. World War I is largely considered the first industrialized war in history. Although the Industrial Revolution had already greatly increased the power of Europe's armies, much of that technological gain had been used against disadvantaged resistance movements in the name of imperial expansion. With Europe's full industrial might unleashed, advancements such as the machine gun, more powerful artillery, armored vehicles which would be known as tanks, and poison gas would terrorize troops in the trenches of Europe. Invented a mere 11 years before, the airplane made its debut as a tool of war. Initially providing vital reconnaissance by surveying the battlefield from above, they would evolve into advanced weapons platforms that would be seen fighting in mass aerial battles and dropping bombs over cities. Other inventions that may seem less consequential are the automobile and the use of motion cameras. Along with advancements in trains, automobiles could get troops and supplies to the front lines faster than ever before, making World War I the first mobile war. And cameras and video cameras would capture the intensity, brutality, and sheer scope of the conflict like never before. On the oceans, submarines such as the German U-boats would threaten the navies and cargo fleets of nations like they had never seen, from below water. At certain points in the war, U-boats would absolutely cripple the Entente's ability to resupply both itself and its armies. This threatened the entire war effort at times. While combat on the Eastern Front was much more dynamic, the story of the Western Front is very different. The war of mobility that was promised by automobiles and trains transformed into a war of trenches and stagnation. By war's end, an estimated 35,000 miles of trenches would be dug in layers across a 400-mile front stretching from Belgium to the south of France. Soldiers lived, fought, and died in these trenches for years. Many trenches in the later years would often be dug into former battlegrounds, forcing soldiers to often cohabitate with the buried bodies of soldiers past. It is no surprise, with the appalling conditions, hordes of rats, and constant threat of artillery fire and poison gas, that trench warfare was a hellish experience for those that experienced it. In between the lines of German and Allied trenches lay what would become known as no man's land. What was once towns, forests, and fields of Europe became literal hellscapes where every scrap of life that was there had been obliterated by years of combat. Years later, inspired by his time in the war, J.R.R. Tolkien would write the definitive fantasy series Lord of the Rings. It is no surprise that the nightmarish conditions in the trenches in no man's land would inspire the dark lands of Mordor and the landscape of evil surrounding it. The war ended at 11 a.m. on November 11, 1918. This date is now recognized as Veterans Day in the United States. Just as the war ended, the Spanish flu would soon ravage an already tired Europe. It would kill millions, with some estimates as extreme as 100 million, between 1918 and 1920. Interestingly enough, the disease likely came from Kansas and was transported overseas by American soldiers. It is called the Spanish flu because only Spanish newspapers would report on the disaster. The aftermath of the war was immense. The German, Austro-Hungarian, Ottoman, and Russian empires, who had been some of the most main powerhouses of Europe for centuries, crumbled. With the fall of Russia meant the rise of Bolshevism and eventually the state known as the USSR. Britain and France's economies, despite their victory, were in tatters. Both of their holds over their colonial holdings would begin to be challenged, would ultimately crumble over the next decades. The Treaty of Versailles, meant to bring lasting peace after what was being called at the time the War to End All Wars, merely laid the groundwork for an embittered Germany and future conflict again between European powers. Perhaps the only real winner of the war was the United States. While the country had already been on the verge of superpowerdom, the war cemented the United States as the superpower of the world. The U.S. suffered relatively few casualties compared to other countries, had no real destruction to contend with, and had developed its industrial might that it would be known for in the coming century. Another winner was Japan. Emerging from the war relatively unscathed, the Japanese were able to gain control of Germany's Pacific holdings, as well as small concessions in China. This would spark a new chapter in Japan's imperial growth and would ultimately help contribute to setting Japan on a collision course with Western powers. In the end, the loss of life as well as the destruction of land and property was immense. An estimated 9 to 11 million soldiers were killed during the war, roughly 14% of the soldiers who served. While disease had often been one of the main contributors to death in previous warfare, the advancement of weaponry such as poison gas, machine guns, and most deadly of all, artillery, contributed to 2/3 of soldiers' deaths. Even today, the scars of war can still be seen in the earth, and unexploded shells are still pulled out of the earth in France every year. An often unaddressed victim of the war are civilians, whether being directly affected by the horrors of combat living near the front lines, or being involved in the multitude of atrocities committed against civilians by the various armies involved. Whether due to ethnic or cultural disdain, or sharp reaction to civilian resistance, civilians were often just as at risk as soldiers were in certain areas of the conflict. Even those far away from the front had to deal with harsh rationing, shortages, and the pain of so much of loss of their family and townsmen on the front lines. An estimated 6 to 13 million civilians died during the war. Perhaps the unsung hero and one of the greatest victims of the conflict was the horse, donkey, and mule. While advancements in technology had led to the plane, train, and automobile, the horse was still one of the main contributors to mobility of the war. Approximately 8 million horses died during the war. And thus concludes the summary of what has been dubbed the Great War and the war to end all wars. It would indeed not be the end of all wars, merely the end of an old world and the beginning of a new one. I will now play a clip compiled from microphones buried underneath the ground, recording the last moments of the war. In this one clip, you can hear 4 years of explosions, death, and destruction give way to peace, albeit a temporary one. Thank you.